No, John. February 5/19 BC. Just keep our heads on straight about where we are. In the first vision, we see some horses of various colors and some chariots that have been assigned by the angel of Jehovah to patrol the earth. And they do just that, and they come back and report. And what is their, you remember their report? What did they find? Everything was peaceful. Everything was quiet. And this was not but just a couple of months after Haggai had promised, the Lord had promised through Haggai that I'm going to shake things up. And then the interceding angel asked the Lord back in chapter 1, verse 12, he says, O Lord of hosts, how long will you have no compassion for Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, with which you have been indignant these 70 years? That is, we just had patrol. Things are still as they always were. Our enemies are quiet. And why are we still in our desperate situation and they're still prospering and peaceful? And so we have an angel interceding on my behalf. How long is it going to be, Lord? Our people have already suffered for 70 years. And God ends that by saying, indeed, I am angry with them, and I will, I guess we could put it in contemporary language, I will take care of the situation. I will see to it that it's done, and I will comfort Zion, which is a way of saying I will comfort my people. And that brings us to verse 18, which is vision number 2. And what can someone tell me about all of these 8 visions? They happened in one night. So we're not going to change dates until we get later on in the book. And the prophet Zechariah says in verse 18, Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there were 4 horns. So I said to the angel who was speaking with me, we've run across him before in chapter 1. So I said to the angel who was speaking with me, quote, what are these? And again, I sympathize with Zechariah because I've asked a lot of time in this book, what are these? What are these? I see the picture, I see the vision, but what's the message? What are you trying to tell me, Lord? Verse 20, then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen. Verse 21, I said, well, good for him. What are these coming to do? We might say today, what are they doing here? Why are they here? And he replied to Zechariah, quote, these are the horns which have scattered Judah, so that no man lifts up his head. But these craftsmen, this was the second group of 4, have come to terrify them being the horns, to throw down the horns of the nations who have lifted up their horns against the land of Judah in order to scatter it. We don't know for sure who these 4 horns, back in verse 18 is the first time we run across them, but horns in the Old Testament are almost always a symbol of what? Strength, power. And you can understand why. Now, some folks assign these 4 horns to Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia. I don't know whether that's right or not. The angel never tells the prophet what these 4 horns, who they are. I think that probably means simply that it indicates all of Israel's enemies. Because he says down in these are the horns in verse 21, which have scattered Judah. And of course, if you take the Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, that would represent the four nations that were guilty of devastating or attacking and subduing the Jewish people at that time. But they are not identified, so I am not going to attempt to give you an identification because it really doesn't change the meaning or the thrust of the vision at all. It indicates God's enemies. Now, there were four of them, and how many craftsmen did God send to take care of the four horns? Four. In other words, enough to do the job. If they had sent 300,000, God would have sent 300,000 craftsmen to confront and to defeat the horns. And I notice also down in verse 21, toward the end of the verse, it says, to throw down the horns of the nations who have, before that, but these craftsmen have come to terrify them. Now, if you go back to verse 18 and take these four horns as representing Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, what craftsmen, shall we say, did the Lord use to take care of the previous horn that had defeated and misused his people? Let's take Assyria. The first one back in 721 that defeated the northern 10 tribes and deported most of them. Who did God use to punish the Assyrians? What nation came in and defeated Assyria? Thank you. So, Babylon is now used as a smith, or I think the King James has smith or craftsman. And then later Babylon becomes a what? A horn. Because they defeated Assyria, and the next thing they do is to attack and defeat God's people. Now, who defeated the Babylonians? The Persians. Right?
Yes.
Okay? So the Babylonians, who were the horns, and now the horn is Persia, the craftsman is Persia, who defeats the Babylonians, but later Persia becomes a what? A horn. It's interesting. God uses the horns to punish his people, raises up a craftsman to punish the horn, and we continue that at least 4 times. If you're lost, let me know. But okay, because we had a straight turnover of 4 world powers: Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and then actually 5, if you want to count Alexander's broken up kingdom, but also the Romans. And each one quickly defeated the one before it and took the world rule, and then was defeated by the next one. So it looks like we've got nations which are alternating between first craftsmen and then becoming a horn against God's people. But anyway, the message is that God is going to carry out his great anger that he had expressed in the few verses before upon the peaceful and quiet heathen nations that he is patrolling, in fact. Okay? And this is in the vision how he tells Zechariah that I've got all things under control. All these horns who have tormented Israel, I have raised up craftsmen in every case to defeat them for the benefit of God's people. Are we ready to move on? If not, say so. Let's don't leave. Okay. That was vision number 2. Chapter number 2 is vision number 3. It takes up the entire chapter. Remember, same night. This vision gives us a further idea of God's showing mercy to his depressed and downtrodden people And as a result of the destruction of their enemies carried out by the craftsmen we just talked about, there's going to be a great growth of God's people. Verse 1, and I'm going to read, let's see, we're going to start with verse 1 and read through verse 5. Zechariah now sees this vision from the Lord. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a man with a measuring line in his hand. So I said, where are you going? And he said to me, to measure Jerusalem, to see how wide it is and how long it is. And behold, the angel who was speaking with me was going out, and another angel was coming out to meet him, and said to him, run, speak to that young man, saying, and this is what I want you to tell him, Jerusalem will be inhabited, but without walls, because of the multitude of men and cattle within. For I, declares the Lord, will be a wall of fire around her, and I will be the glory in her midst. Have we run across a man with a measuring line before? I think we have, haven't we? Over in the first vision, my mind has just gone blank, but it seems like, well, whether we did or not, we got one now.
Verse 16,
Mike, thank you. My house will be, oh, and a measuring line, verse 116, and a measuring line will be stretched over it, and what he's talking about in verse 16 is the building of Jerusalem. And now, thank you, Mike, we have that being carried out. Now, the man with the measuring line is probably the angel of Jehovah, angel of the Lord, your translation may have. And a measuring line is a symbol used to tell them that we are about to begin preparations for the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem. Verse 2, so I said, where are you going? To measure Jerusalem to see how wide and long it is. And it was obviously not the Jerusalem of that time. And why could it not be necessarily the Jerusalem of that day?
Because it would be without walls.
Be without walls. And who is going to build the walls? We've already studied this book.
God was going to be the wall. He's talking about heaven. He's talking about heaven. God's going to be the wall.
Well, yes, God's going to build the wall, but Nehemiah, through Nehemiah, okay. Nehemiah, about 70 years later, is going to get a commission from God to build the wall around Jerusalem. So we get the idea that, we may be talking about something other than the earthly city of Jerusalem here. Was it normal at that time to build a city, a big city, without walls? Why not? Oh my goodness, for protection. You were wide open if you didn't have defensive walls around your city.
You built those walls in 52 days.
They sure did. Nehemiah and his friends built that wall in 52 days, Ed. You're absolutely right. So it looks like we're talking about a different Jerusalem, maybe a Jerusalem that's in the future, and since it's a Jerusalem without walls, it could be what we've talked about in Hebrews 12, Jerusalem. Don't forget that. I sat down for about 30 minutes and in the first 5 verses of this, trying to figure out who was going where to talk to who for what. Okay? I don't think it's, I can tell you what I came up with, but I'm not sure it's worth taking up any of our valuable class time But except for to tell you that other angel in verse 3, he is new. Another angel was coming out to meet him. Apparently, somebody was going to the man with the measuring line and asked him, what are you coming here to do? But anyway, let's don't get bogged down there. Verse 4 tells us it's going to be a Jerusalem without walls, because there's going to, and why? Because there's going to be what? So many people. It's going to be so many cattle. And what were we studying about 2 months ago that Nehemiah was trying to do with regard to Jerusalem? Remember, there was so few people in it. He was having to go out and force 1 out of every 10 to move into the city to give it some sort of population. And now we are being told that the Jerusalem that God is interested in, the heavenly Jerusalem, if you'll pardon my language, is going to be very populated, and it will not have walls. And I've got some verses here that I think might help us. I think it will help us anyway. Try to get our minds wrapped around this Jerusalem concept, and it's from Isaiah. And Isaiah was written a couple of hundred years before the date that we're studying in Zechariah 2. And it says, it will come about in the last days that the mountain, don't forget that, of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains, and it will be raised above the hills. And what's next? All nations will stream to it. That would result in quite a population growth. Verse 3, and many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, which is another name for Jerusalem, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Okay, those two lines are parallel. And he will judge between the nations and render decisions, or, let me get down here. Okay, that's it. That's as far as we need to read. And also I want to go to Luke 24:47 about the law going forth from Jerusalem. This is after Jesus' crucifixion. He was on the road to Emmaus, if I remember right, and he encountered some disciples who were dismayed because Jesus, they thought, was dead. And after discussing things with them, then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures. And he said to them, thus it is written that Christ should suffer and rise again from the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins would be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. So the gospel law is simply what Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 3 or 4 is talking about, that the message of the gospel is going to begin at Jerusalem. And it did. Where did it start? What chapter and what book? Acts chapter 2, Peter's first sermon. And from there, the message went everywhere. And people flocked to the, if you please, the house of the Lord. Became Christians. Daniel 2:35. Daniel had just seen this huge statue made up of gold, silver, and I forget the third one. Made in brass. And then the fourth kingdom, which I think everyone agrees represents Rome. He says, then the iron, the clay, and the bronze, and the silver, oh, there they are right there. Come on, Lloyd, wake up. Were crushed at the all at the same time, and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them was found. And why did that happen? Because the stone that struck the statue, bringing it down, crushing it, became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. We've talked about the mountain before. Now, just 9 verses later, in Daniel 2:44, in the days of those kings, the Roman kings, Jesus was born under what kind of king? A Roman king. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for other people. Another people, it will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, and it will endure forever. And don't forget Hebrews chapter 12, and we won't go back there again, but beginning with verse 18 through the end of the chapter. So I'm trying to give you an idea that God's house, which Isaiah said was going to be built, people were going to come to the mountain, to the house of the Lord, just to give us an identity of what Isaiah was talking about. Now, just before Jesus' birth in Luke, he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord will give him the throne of his father David, which had been promised for ever since the beginning. And he will reign over the house of Jacob, and his kingdom, again, will be permanent. It will destroy all the other kingdoms, and it will have no end at all. I did have something on Hebrews 2:12, didn't I? But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads, or a large group or a large number of angels, and he continues that thought in the next few verses. And finally, Paul in Galatians 4:25 and 26, in the story of Sarah, who was who was the rightful wife of Abraham, and Hagar, who was not the rightful wife, but was concubine, so to speak. And he goes through a comparison of 2 mountains. But he says regarding Hagar, this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. And he's going to make a contrast to another mountain. And corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. Now, the present Jerusalem here refers to the physical city of Jerusalem that existed at the time of Paul. But the Jerusalem in verse 26, the Jerusalem which concerns us, which is our goal, which is our city, is free. She is our mother. And all of these things tie together with the same sort of language, using the same images, and tell us that we are not looking, at least ultimately, at a literal city of Jerusalem, even in the book of Zechariah, because I think the focus is the church of the living God, not the physical city of Jerusalem, which, as far as I know, never existed from the time of Zechariah without walls. Never did. Now, some of our religious friends are putting this off in the future. Now, it's been so, as far as they understand, this Jerusalem that Zechariah is talking about has yet to be built. But Jerusalem literally without walls. 2,500 years have passed since the time Zechariah wrote this, and they are still looking for it. Just wanted you to know that.
Three writers said that it would appear in the lifetime of some that were living at that time. Matthew, Isaiah, and John, I believe, is the three writers.
Yes. Yes, and there's ample evidence that the kingdom of God, or the house of God, if you prefer, or Hebrews 12, the city of the living God, or whatever you want, however the New Testament refers to it, is a present reality, and has been since the days of the book of Acts, or the death of Jesus, New Testament times, Jesus on the cross. Now, I want to look at one more thing. How did this city get so big? Because previously it was limited to what group of people? Jews. Okay? Well, the expansion and the population growth that Zechariah is receiving in visions from God about is more than what the Jews could ever do. So Ephesians 2:14 talks about Jesus being our peace, who made both groups, Jews and non-Jews, or Jews and Gentiles, and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall, which kept, by and large, non-Jews out of the city of God's people. Now, there were proselytes, but they did not go out and recruit them vigorously at all. He did it by abolishing in his, that's Jesus' flesh, the enmity or hostility, which is the law of commandments, that is the law of Moses, which separated and kept the Jews separate from other people. So that in himself, Jesus might make the two people two into one new man, thus establishing peace. So when God saw fit to break down the wall that surrounded the Jews, which God gave through Moses, and lasted about 1,500 years, then we had a population explosion. Remember how many were baptized in the second chapter of the book of Acts? What was it, 3,000? 5,000? 3,000. Then later, I seem to remember a figure of 5,000 people. And then it went to Antioch, which was not a Jewish city. And then Paul took it all over non-Jewish or Gentile cities. And the gospel began to spread like crazy. And the Jerusalem, which is above, began to have a population explosion. But we're going to learn that even though Jerusalem, which is above, doesn't have any walls, that's not going to matter. That's not going to be a big deal at all. Now, our friends who believe that this is still in the future say, since nothing like this has happened in the history of the city, this prophecy has to be still unfulfilled and waiting for it to be fulfilled. Any questions on the first 5 verses of Zechariah? Hasn't he answered the angel's plea? Remember back in chapter 1, verse 16, did you tell me that, Lord, how long are things going to be like this? When are you going to carry out your promises concerning your people in the city of Jerusalem? Okay, let's begin with verse 6. And, no, I'll tell you what. I'm going to end the class early because the next reading goes all the way down through verse 13 through the end of the chapter, and we'll never, ever I want to do it as a unit. So we've only got about 8 or 9 minutes. Any questions? Remember the words Mount, City, and those words that I kept repeating, and go back and read Hebrews 12:18 again. And you can't miss the connection between what whoever wrote Hebrews wrote and what Zechariah is writing now, and Isaiah chapter 2, and the Jerusalem without walls, and it will all become easier to understand because in Hebrews 12, he calls the church the city of the living God. The city of the living God. Any questions? Let us pray. Lord, for your grace and your mercy, we give you thanks tonight. And we pray that we will take the mercy and the grace that we have been extended and extended to others. Make our lives a light on a hill to bring others to you, to come to Jerusalem, which has no walls, but which has all the protection she needs. Bless us and keep us in Jesus' name. Amen.